Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. The rapture and who are the saints in the book of Revelation? Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. This is part 29 of our in-depth study in eschatology, or the study of end times, with a focus on the rapture. Now, let me again redefine a few phrases and words, not assuming that everyone knows the lingo. Uh, so, when I say the rapture, um, specifically talking about when Jesus will catch away his church out of the earth. That is different than the second coming when Jesus comes back, his feet steps on the Mount of Olives, and he begins his rule for 1,000 years. Now, there are three commonly held views on when the rapture will happen, because that is the main debate. In other words, when is this rapture or catching away will be? And by the way, let me just say this. I'm not going to get into what some people view as the word, or splitting the hairs on the definition of the word rapture. Rapture, catching away, whichever one you want. The Bible says catching away. All right. But the most commonly used word is rapture. Basically means the same thing. Okay. So the biggest debate is when this rapture is going to happen. There are three commonly held views. Now, this centers around the period called the tribulation period, or the Great Tribulation period. It is a period, a 7-year period, in which Jesus will be judging the wicked, the ungodly. Now, this is also called the Day of the Lord, okay? And so there are three commonly held views. There's what's called the Pre Tribulation Rapture position, which I hold to. In other words, I believe that the church will be raptured or caught away before the tribulation period begins. There are those who believe that the church will go 3.5 years in the tribulation period and then be raptured. This is referred to as the mid-tribulation position. There are those that believe the church will go entirely through the 7-year period and then will be raptured at the end of the tribulation period. Now, let me say this before we continue, that though I hold strongly to a pre-tribulation period position, there is no specific or plain verse that states, and for that matter, any position, that when this rapture is going to happen. So there is no plain verse that says that the church will be raptured before the tribulation period. And as I said, none of the positions have a plainly stated verse. So whether it's pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib, no one can say that, produce where it says that the church will be raptured either before the tribulation period, in the middle of the tribulation period, or at the end of the tribulation period. But 1 Thessalonians 4 tells us that Jesus will catch away the church. And I say that because there are those who go too far in their being so dogmatic that they accuse people such as myself, or anyone who doesn't hold to their view, as being false teachers, not even going to heaven. Okay, that's going too far. It is ungodly and it's not Christian. At the end of the day, we can just agree to disagree, because again, though I hold firmly to my position, I believe I have plenty of circumstantial scriptural evidence. What I lack, and any position lacks, is a specific stating when the rapture is going to happen. So let's just keep it in love. We can move on. Now, as I said in my question, I want to talk about who are the saints in the book of Revelations? Now, in order for us to answer that question, there's a couple of things that I want to, well, a few things I should say, I want to lay at the foundation. Part of the problem to me, when I hear different views, what I see lacking the most is a scriptural comparison. In other words, in the book of Revelation, if you really want to understand the book of Revelations, you have to have a good understanding of what was spoken in the Old Testament writings of the prophets. For example, in Matthew 24, when Jesus says that when you see the abomination that makes desolation, and then he puts this footnote, spoken by Daniel the prophet, and then he says, let the reader understand. And that's important because he wants us to understand. But how do we get that understanding? Well, we have to go to the book of Daniel, most notably chapter 9 and chapter 12. Now, another thing is that there are other phrases and statements that are spoken in the Old Testament that John uses. He uses the language. So, for example, in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, he talks about Babylon, right? The city of Babylon. He uses the imagery of Babylon, and he uses that imagery that comes out of the Old Testament judgment of the city of Babylon, whose ruler was Nebuchadnezzar. But he uses the language. So again, if I'm reading the book of Revelation, I certainly should have a good understanding of the Old Testament prophecies. That's what I want to do as we define then who are these saints in the book of Revelations. Because are they Christians? And again, let's go a step further. Are they the body of Christ? Now, one of the things is I said is that when it comes to prophecy, we should pay attention to detail. So when he's talking about a group of people or a particular time, we need to pay attention to the detail. So for example, we know Jesus is not coming back a second time without coming in the clouds. Why? He makes it clear. If someone says the Messiah is over here or the Messiah is over there. But I'll keep this in mind. There was a time when you was able to say that. You could say, oh, Jesus is in Jerusalem. Jesus is in Capernaum. Jesus is in Nazareth. But he said when it comes to his coming back, his second coming, he says he's going to come in the clouds. Every eye will see him. So that is a very specific description that we should pay attention to. And despite all of that, there are a lot of people who will tell you, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Son of God. So Jesus was very clear on that. So let's go, excuse me, bring up our scripture here. Now, I'm going to go back to Matthew chapter 24. Now, just also, I'm going to go back to chapter 23. Now, some of this, of course, we have studied this many times over and over. We're going to keep studying them because I think it's important that we see it over and over again. But Jesus in chapter 23 had just gave one of the most scathing rebukes of the Pharisee. And he ends it with this statement in verse 37. It says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, she who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, yet you are not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. But I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. Now again, let's pay attention to very specific words. He says, you will never see me. So get that. Jesus is making a prediction. You will never see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. So then chapter 24 says, as he left, he was going out of the temple complex, his disciples came up and called his attention to the temple buildings. Then he replied to them, "Don't you see all these things? I assure you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." So it kind of adds a little even more detail about the fact that they won't see him. Well, also what's going to happen is that the temple, which at this time had been in building for 46 years, the Pharisees told Jesus, it's going to be completely destroyed. All right, so in verse 3, he says, while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Well, 3 questions, right? Excuse me, that he's going to answer. So, so the first part from verses 4 down to verse 14, I'm going to come back to this. We have already studied this and we have unpacked this. But in verse 14, he says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So we talked about plenty with this term, the end, meaning and who and what it's referring to. But again, we'll come back to that. We'll swing back around because we dealt with it in part 28. I want to focus on, again, who are the saints of the book of Revelations. So let's go on. So when he talks about the end, okay, I'm going to insert here that I believe that he is referring to the end of the church age, or the time when he says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as the testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay, so I want to stop on let's say right here, what period of time is he referring to? Well, in Acts chapter 1, as he's getting ready to ascend into heaven, and this is a very important question here. Let me bring it up. Let me go on and show you this here. Acts chapter 1. So verse 6 says, so when they had come together, they asked him, "Lord, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel at this time?" And then he said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or the periods that the Father set by his own authority, but you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come unto you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Okay. Now, why this? I think they're the time and the period that he points out. It's not for you to know the times and the periods. Well, what is the time and the period that he's referring to? The question they just asked him. Are you restoring the kingdom of Israel? So there's a time for that. What he tells them is that don't you worry about that time. You be my witnesses. What we talked about in the last video is what is the witnesses? What is going on when Jesus, by being Jesus' witness, right? What is God doing? And we went to Ephesians chapter 2, where he says that God is building his sanctuary. God is building his body, his sons, and that's an important detail. So now, let's go back to verse 6, though. He says, so they asked him, are you restoring the kingdom of Israel at this time? This is a very important question. It's a very valid question, because when you go back to the Old Testament verses of Scripture, it's literally filled with prophecies and promises that God will restore, notice, the kingdom to Israel. Okay? But first, let's go back and see what's going on in the timeline and sort of the pattern of how this is going to come before that happens. Now, they asked a question. will you restore the kingdom at this time? He says, it's not for you to know that time or period. There is a time and a period for that. So when Jesus says here in verse 14, this good news that the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Then he goes on in verse 15. So to me, he's closing out one thought or one period. Okay, we'll come back to that. Because I'm acknowledging that there are people that disagree with where I'm going with this. But look at verse 15. So when you see the abomination that calls desolation. So let's stop. So remember in verse 14 he says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. So notice the difference here. He's speaking to all nations. The witness, the kingdom, the proclamation is to all nations. But remember Peter asked the question, or the disciples asked the question, when are you restoring the kingdom to Israel? Their focus on Israel. Now remember, throughout Jesus' 3.5-year ministry, they had been preoccupied with that. In fact, we know around the time Jesus' birth that there was an excitement, there was an anticipation for the Messiah to come. Not to save them from their sins per se, but to restore Israel. And that's important because it's a valid hope. However, they're just missing specifically what God is saying. Even here, Jesus is telling them the good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as the testimony, and then the end will come. Well, as the end comes, then what happens? Now he switches thought. He switches from to a testimony to all nations to, so when you see the abomination that causes desolation. Well, who is he talking about right here? So when you see the abomination that causes desolations, spoken by Daniel the prophet. Now let's go and talk about, let's bring up Daniel the prophet. Come on. Here we go. So what I want to show you, again, we have studied this many times. Daniel chapter 9, we have studied this many times. And I'm just going to read verse 24. And I'm going to read the whole thing because I know if I don't, I'm going to end up regretting that and going back. This is a prophecy. And again, the context of the prophecy. Let me go back. Let me go back to verse 1. This is chapter 9, verse 1. It says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, a Mede by birth, who was ruler over the kingdoms of the Chaldeans. Okay. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books, according to the word of the Lord, to Jeremiah the prophet, that the number of years for the desolation of Jerusalem would be 70. So now, he's reading his predecessor, Jeremiah the prophet. Let me stop and do a sidebar. Prophecy is so important and paramount to our faith. Because, and I'm not talking about these fake prophets today, where you have people who pretend to be prophets. They put the title on because, prophets, apostle, and nowadays it's gotten so ridiculous that people are master prophets, chief apostles. Okay, I'm not talking about that fakery, but and the reason why it is disgusting what they do, these prophets today, because God is very careful. God prophecies set apart God from all others. So whether it's mediums, right? You see these fake shows about mediums, right? People who can speak to the dead, going to tell you what dead people are. And people are so foolish to believe this mess. All right, I digress. But they had it back then. They had false prophets, they had false mediums and spiritualists back then. People who can claim that I'm speaking to the dead, I'm speaking to, whatever, right? But what they prophesy never comes to pass. If you read the book of Jeremiah, one of the things you will see is that he was a true prophet. They knew he was a true prophet. Zedekiah the king, the last king of Judah, came to him. He was a wicked king. He came to him and says, "What is the word of the Lord?" Now, he came to him, uh, he came to him um, um, in secret, okay? So he came to him in secret to um, ask the word of the Lord. Now, I say that because all of his other prophets were false prophets. One of the false prophets. Now, Jeremiah had been prophesying that Nebuchadnezzar was coming and he was going to destroy Israel. He's going to conquer Israel. His false prophet said, that's not going to happen. Peace, 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 peace. In fact, he made these iron yoke with horns on them, and he says, with these, you're going to drive back Nebuchadnezzar. False prophet. My point is that God's true prophets and true prophecies are always, he takes very, very much care for that, because that sets him apart from all others, from all other predictions, from the Nostradamus or whatever. When God prophesies something, it comes to pass. And God will select and choose a true vessel in which to speak his word. Jeremiah was one of those. Okay. So Jeremiah was one of those who was a true prophet. The reason I say that is because nearly 70 years later, Daniel is reading these prophecies. One of the prophecies is that the exile would last 70 years. He's reading this. He's going back and he's reading like, man, we're almost at the end of the 70 year. So that's what I want you to see right here. Notice he says right here that he understood that Jerusalem would be the exile, the number of the years of the desolation of Israel. Now notice that word desolation. Israel is destroyed. Israel is destroyed. So he says, for the number for the number of years for the desolation of Jerusalem would be 70 years. Okay. All right. So now he begins this prayer here. He begins this prayer, and God dispatches Gabriel, the angel. Now, Gabriel's a bad dude, right? We see Gabriel here. We see Gabriel at the birth of Jesus. Okay. Look at verse 24. He says 70 weeks. So he dispatches, and here's what the angel says in verse 23. At the beginning of your petition, an answer went out, and I've come to give it. For you are treasured by God, so consider the message and understand the vision. Now, let me just say this. God wants us to understand Scripture. He does not give it in dark secrets. That's some of the things some of these false prophets are saying. He doesn't give us revelation, doesn't give us Scripture so that we can understand it. He gives it very much so we can understand it. Verse 24 says, 70 weeks. Now let's stop. A week here is a week is a 7-year period, okay? A 7-year period of time. So 70 weeks is 70 sets of 7-year period of times, totaling 490 years. 70 weeks are decreed about your people in your holy city to bring the rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, notice he says 70 weeks are decreed about your people, and that's what I want to focus on here. Your people. 70 weeks are decreed about your people, okay, in your holy city. See, think about that. So, your people, your holy city, and then look at the last phrase, the holy place. So this is Israel. And this is why I want you to see that there's, when the disciples asked Jesus, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel? Notice these 70-week prophecies are about Israel, the people of Israel, the holy city, and the holy place or the temple. All right, verse 25, know and understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now watch this, to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So who is the prophecy about? Jerusalem. So let's stop this decree, because this started a prophetic timeline. This prophetic timeline began under the rulership of Cyrus, the king of the king of the Medes and Persians. So if you want to read that, Ezra chapter 1, it opens up that way. The book of Ezra opens up with, from this perspective, would be just a few short years. Because remember, the 70 years is ending as Daniel realizes. So a few short years from this, Cyrus issued a decree for them to go back. After the 70 years conclude, then he says they're going to go back and do what? Restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So you read Ezra and Nehemiah. But the issuing of the decree is found in Ezra chapter 1. So that begins this 70 weeks prophecy. The clock starts. So he says, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, until Messiah the Prince would be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or 69 weeks. So now, if you are reading or studying the prophecy like the disciples were, hey, 69 weeks? Hey, we know Cyrus issued a decree. So this is why they're asking, the disciples are asking, hey, are you restoring the kingdom? Obviously, however, they're not reading all of it. He says it will be rebuilt with the plans and the moat, but in difficult times. After those 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off. So right here, we didn't come up to the point of Jesus. So now, at this point here, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. I said it before, and I'll say this again. Verses are not inspired. Verses are not inspired. I think verse 27 should have began here at this point. Anyway, he says, the people of the coming prince, because he shifts thought. The people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So what is he talking about right here? The end will come with the flood, and to the end there will be war, desolations are decreed. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to the sacrifice and offerings, and the abomination of desolation will be on the wing of the temple, until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. Now, so that kind of gives us a picture to the end. Now, here's where we're not doing this justice. Again, you should be reading the entire book of Daniel. So, for example, if you go back, and I'm going to come out of this here and do this quickly here, see if I can find this here. In the book of Daniel, here we go. This is a image right here, a artist rendition, okay? And what you see here is Daniel, this dream is found in Daniel chapter 2. Now, this actually was at the beginning of Daniel's exile. He was deported when Nebuchadnezzar began to invade Jerusalem. He was deported. In the second chapter, so this is early on, Nebuchadnezzar received this dream from God. Okay, from God. And what you're looking at, and again, you go back and read Daniel chapter 2. That's why I said we're not doing it fully justice, because we would have to read Daniel. We should read Daniel. And look at that, and a whole lot more. Okay, a whole lot more. In fact, this image here that you see from Daniel chapter 7 on is really the interpretation of this image, further explanation of this image. So this is the image that Nebuchadnezzar received. He said he saw this grand human form, head of gold, and then he says chest of arms and silver, and then the belly of thighs and bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay, meaning the toes. Now, by the way, the feet and toes represents 10 nations. I just jumped ahead of myself. Let me go back to the interpretation. So in Daniel chapter 2, this happens. You see a vision, and now Daniel gives the interpretation. It's 4 world ruling kingdoms up until the end of the age, the time when Jesus comes. The rock that you see there is the Jesus coming and destroying this image, and then he takes up rulership. So the interpretation was that the head of gold was the king of Babylon, the chest of arms, the chest and arms of silver was the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. The belly of the thighs and bronze was the kingdom of Greece, the Grecian kingdom under Alexander the Great. And then the legs of iron was the Roman Empire. And then the feet of iron and clay. Now, as you notice here, some people, it's listed as the kingdom of the restored Rome. Now, the reason why I believe that they make that connection of Rome being kind of coming back or restored is because partially of the iron, if you notice, the legs of iron, and then you see that the feet and the toes of feet in iron. Now, feet iron of clay. But that's kind of the picture there. That's what you see. Okay. So, let's go back to all right. So when he says right here, he'll make a covenant for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he put a stop to the sacrifice, and the abomination of the desolation will be on the wing of the temple, until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. So again, when you look at that picture of Daniel's image, you see all of this kingdom here. That's why I said if you go back to chapter 7, and chapter 7, 8, and then 9, 10, and 11, all of these are interpretations of that vision that Nebuchadnezzar had. That's really what the whole book of Daniel is saying right here. Now, when Jesus then talks about, so verse 15, so when you see the abomination, that caused this desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel. So we just read that. And then he says, standing in the holy place. So the question is, when is this going to take place? He says, let the reader understand. Now, we do have a timeline here because he says this takes place during a week. In fact, it takes place in the 70th week of Daniel's 70-week prophecy. Now, so he switched from, in verse 14, from the good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed to all nations, right? To now he's focusing on what? Jerusalem here. He's back to Israel, the people of Israel. So Old Testament prophecy centers around and focus on God's plan. It says it over and over and over and over again that God is going to judge Israel, then God is going to restore Israel. God has an eternal future for Israel in that land. So we see the switch back to Israel here, that he's talking about Israel, because remember, when he says, when you see the abomination, this is what Daniel was talking about. Well, who was Daniel talking about? Your people, your city, the holy temple. So now this is what he's talking about right here. Then he says, then those in Judea. How do we know this, by the way? Let's go back. So when you see the abomination called the desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. So right now we know he's not talking about the church. Now, I got to refer you back then to, we spent a great amount of time talking about who is the body of Christ. And that's important here because let's pay attention to the details. Here he's talking about a time that was prophesied about Israel, okay? How do we know he's talking about Israel right here? Well, one, Daniel's 70 weeks tell us he's talking about Israel. And then notice here in verse 16, then those in Judea. So he's not talking about the nations. He's not talking to the nations, right? As he was in verse 14. So he says, those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on a housetop must not come down to get his things out of the house. And a man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. So the church is never told to observe the Sabbath. And then specifically, notice he's talking about specifically a time and place where this is taking place at. And there are those that will say that this takes place doing in AD 70. I'm not going to unpack that yet, but I'm acknowledging the different people who will say that this takes place in AD 70. And I'm going to say I just don't agree with that. For several reasons. Even though AD 70 certainly could say that this is a close proximity, in a lot of things that happen. The question here is that we have other scriptures that specifically tell us when this event happens, what happens, and the process of this event happening to the Jewish people. The one thing about AD 70 that we do not see is the abomination that causes desolation. That is one reason why I cannot accept that AD 70. Now, AD 70, of course, is when the General Titus went in and destroyed the temple. He leveled Jerusalem. But what is interesting is that, and there are different, I don't know if there's a historic record that says that Titus went into the temple and caused desolation. He destroyed the temple, yes, but I don't know if there's a reason that he went into it. If you go back and you read some of the historical account of the invasion of Titus. Paul says that the man who goes into the temple of God will proclaim that he is God. If you go back to the other prophecies, and I told you before, we're not doing it justice, but when you go back to Daniel and in his, again, each chapter 7, 8, 9, 10 is a different explanation of the image. One of the things that you see is that the beast is the man that speaks arrogant things. He considers himself a god and demands to be worshipped as God. This is what he's talking about. When you see this, run. And then he says, pray that your flight may not be in the wintertime. So again, he is focusing on Israel and in the time of Israel. Then he says, verse 21, for at that time there will be great tribulation, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now, and never will again. So now, are you saying, if you behold to the fact that this is talking about AD 70, that this tribulation was so great that it hasn't happened again? Of course, worse things have happened. See, worse things have happened. That's why I said I pay attention to the details here. So then he goes on and he says, and unless those days were limited, no one would survive. But those days will be limited because of the elect. Now, some people will again say that this is referring to the church. The elect is the church. Well, the term elect means chosen one, just like the word saint means called out ones. When you look in the Old Testament, the elect here, in the Old Testament, the Old Testament scripture as well as here, he's referring to Israel. Now, again, he didn't jump back to talking about the church, the believers, the body of Christ. This is talking about, again, Israel, what is going on with Israel. Okay? So, look at this. Unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days would be limited because of the elect. Look at verse 23. If anyone tells you, look, here's the Messiah over here, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. Now again, this is talking about Israel right here, not the church. Take note, I have told you in advance, so if they tell you, look, he is in the wilderness, don't go out. Look, he is in the inner rooms, don't believe him. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will be gathered. All right, so look at verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun would be darkened, the moon would not shed its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the celestial powers will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. As he said, this is referring to the second coming. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then will all the peoples of the earth mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven in power, and with power and great glory. Now again, this is a different description of when Jesus comes to receive his church. In fact, when you look at the descriptions of the rapture of the church, they are different than what you see here in terms of the second coming. The second coming is always described as the Son of Man coming in the sky, appearing in the sky. And notice he said all the people of the earth will mourn. And nowhere does it say that, well, not all people. Now think about this. If he's talking about the rapture, if this is talking about the rapture, or if you're saying that the rapture happens at the same time as this event, right? By the way, so there's no description of the the rapture here. Jesus coming to receive his people. Keep this in mind. Let's go to John chapter 14. So look at John chapter 14. Let's compare the two. Your heart must not be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If not, I would have told you. I am going to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and receive you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. So notice this promise that Jesus is speaking to his disciples. I'm going to prepare a place for you. Then if I go, I am going to come back and receive you to myself. Let's take a look. First Thessalonians. Let's look at chapter 4. I want to compare. Look at verse 13. So it says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, concerning those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve like the rest who have no hope. Since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, in the same way God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep through Jesus. For we say this to you by a revelation from the Lord. We who are still alive at the Lord's coming. Now, if this is the same coming, I say it is not the same coming. I say it is the coming that Jesus is referring to. I will come and receive you to myself. If this is the same coming, then notice this here. This is the coming that he is referring to. Let's see. What I'm looking for? All right. Okay, verse 30. He says, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn. So notice, so what you're going to say is at the same time that Jesus is coming back to receive us, there's rejoicing, but then all the people are mourning. Now notice this, all the people will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Right? So all of them so those who are mourning will see Jesus. They're going to see him in the sky. All the people of the earth, we're told over and over again, every eye will see him. They're going to mourn. However, if this is the coming, verse 15 again, for this we say to you by revelation, note the word revelation. And then you'll note that Paul also talks about mystery. There's a mystery. Then he says, for this we say to you by revelation from the Lord, we who are still alive at the Lord's coming. So if he's talking about the second coming, every eye is mourning. So there's some people mourning, but notice what he says right here. Not everybody's mourning. Because guess what? We who are still alive. So if we're still alive, that means we're here. So we're not going to be mourning, or those who are in Christ, right? So we who are still alive at the Lord's coming will certainly have no advantage over those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven. Notice that word phrase, himself. Because remember in John, when Jesus said, I'm going to come back and receive you. Now the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the archangel's voice and with the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first, and we who are still alive will be caught up. So that's that word caught up. I guess some people split hairs and take issue with the word rapture. Okay, caught up together with them. Those what? Those whom God has brought with him. Right? So those, the dead in Christ, rising first. So he says, then we who are still alive will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. So this fulfillment here is of John 14. when Jesus says, I will receive you unto myself, that where I am, you will always be. So at this point here, if this is the second coming right here, well, some people are rejoicing, but not everybody, right? All the tribes are mourning. All right. So then he goes on and he says, so he says you're going to see, watch this, he says the Son of Man, or the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verse 31, and this is very interesting because some people see this as the rapture, or they try to say this is the rapture. So look at verse 31. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Now, why this cannot be talking about the rapture of the church? One obvious reason right here. Let's go back and read. As I say, we pay attention to details. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet. Right there, that's not the promise for the rapture. That's why we see in John 14 and we see in 1 Thessalonians the Lord himself coming for his church, the Lord himself coming for his body. That's right here, we can see that that's not it. So then he goes on and says, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the others. So let's take one other look. And as I said, we're going to come back to this because we're going to look at a couple of verses. I mean, we're going to really kind of unpack this. Zechariah. Let's see here. Where do I want? Is it 6? Oh, so chapter 2. Chapter 2. Oh, I'm in the wrong book. That's why. It's Zechariah. Wrong book. Here we go. Chapter 2. So I want you to look at language. Now watch this. This is Zechariah, which is a prophetic book. I think it's comparable. We can almost call it the revelation of the Old Testament. But not only that, however, again, if we want to understand language, if you want to understand language, we certainly should understand. Jesus spoke the language of the Old Testament. Okay, so watch what he says right here. So remember, he says here, verse 31. He says he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet. So right here, it's not talking about the church because the angels are not gathering us. Jesus himself. And that's kind of an awesome thought in itself. But Jesus himself is coming back. But watch this. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. So look at here. I want you to see some language here. Verse 6, Zechariah said, get up, leave the land of the north. This is the Lord's declaration. Now, by the way, this prophecy, I think it could have a twofold, but mostly, let's see, I'm going to show you, I'm going to read this. This is a post, by the way, prophecy. Okay, a post prophecy after Daniel, remember Daniel was reading, he said the 70-year exile is over. So Zechariah is a post exile prophecy book, only a fraction of the people came back to the land of Israel. Okay, so when Cyrus issued a decree, only for them to go and restore and build Jerusalem, a fraction of the people came back. So I want you to keep kind of the context here. So look at verse 6. It says, get up, leave the land of the north. This is the Lord's declarations. For I have scattered you like the four winds of heaven. This is the Lord's declarations. Go, Zion, escape, you who are living with daughter Babylon. I'll come back to this, but I just want you to see that right here, we'll come back to that verse because I want you to see. So when he said he will send out his angels, they would gather his four, it's like from the four winds. What is he talking about? The scattered Israelites, the scattered Jewish people. That's the prophecy that even yet has to be fulfilled. That's the prophecy that he scattered them to the four winds. He's going to gather them from the four winds. So again, he's not talking about the rapture of the church here. And that's my point. Again, we're going to come back because I'm laying the foundation to who is the saints in Revelation. So again, I'm building up to that. So we're going to pick it up in the next study. So look, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you ever thought a comment, add it to the comments section below all comments. So welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.